Why did no one step in when she hit the floor? That question hung in the air long before anyone dared to ask it out loud. Because in that frozen second, her body twisted on the mat, the shock of two full-force kicks still ringing through the training bay. The silence from 282 Navy SEALs didn't feel like hesitation. It felt like revelation. Like every man there had suddenly realized something they should have understood hours ago. She wasn't the fragile one. They were. The impact still throbbed through her ribs as she pushed her glove into the vinyl surface, breath tight, controlled, deliberate. She rose without sound, without anger, without even the flicker of emotion they expected. The kind of rise that didn't ask for permission. The kind that said quietly, but unmistakably, "You made a mistake." Her eyes lifted first. Calm, too calm. The kind of calm that seasoned operators recognized from deployment. The calm someone wears right before they commit to something irreversible. But 15 minutes earlier, no one had seen her that way. Back then, she was just the medic in the center of the ring. Just the quiet petty officer with a few commendations and a recon tab most assumed she didn't earn the hard way. Just the woman standing in front of almost 300 men who'd spent their entire careers being told they were the sharpest blades on the table. And blades don't like being told they're steel sharper than them. Especially when that steel looks, at first glance, like her. Mara Kessler stood at the center of the evaluation compound that morning, fingertips tightening her gloves, expression neutral and unreadable. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't proud. She wasn't even thinking about the crowd watching her. Her mind moved differently, precise, layered, always scanning the edges first. Where are the exits? Where is the blind spot? Who is watching for the wrong reasons? Who is underestimating? Because she could feel it, the snickers from the rail, the muttered comments, the raised brows, the smirks that weren't even subtle. A medic, seriously. She's barely 130 pounds. Hope she brought a PowerPoint. Normal noise, she lived with worse on deployment. Opinions never worried her, only intent did. And there was something about two men in the front row, Troy Calder and Jace Marin, that felt like intent. Troy, the tank of the gold team rotation. A wall of muscle and ego with a chip carved across both shoulders. Jace, his shadow, lighter, smaller, louder. The kind of trainee who spent more time proving he belonged than actually learning how to. Their eyes told her everything. Not here to learn. Not here to observe. Here to test. And not the way the evaluation board meant. Still, she kept her breath steady, shoulders level, emotions tucked neatly behind the calm she'd honed through 3 deployments and too many nights praying the wounded survived long enough for daylight. She stepped into the center of the mat, quiet, direct. "I'm not here to impress you," she told them. "I'm here to show you how medics survive when you don't see the threat until it touches your back." No applause. No recognition. Just silence. And the soft, ugly laughter of 2 men who didn't know yet what they were walking toward. The first demo went smoothly, controlled, professional. Her volunteer lunged and fell exactly the way physics required. A clean drop, a clean lock, a clean reset. She didn't smile, didn't grandstand, didn't teach like a performer. She taught like someone who'd used these skills with blood under her nails and incoming fire splitting the air above her head. Some of the operators leaned in, studying, recalculating her. But not Troy. Not Jace. Their whispers grew louder, meaner, more pointed. She staged that fall. Slow motion Instagram moves. She's not doing that against 2 threats. Their voices weren't jokes anymore. They were warnings. Mara felt it, felt that cold shift in the atmosphere the way animals sense storms before clouds appear. Something was bending, something was coming. But she stayed in the drill. She always finished what she started. When she called for 2 volunteers for the final scenario, she didn't have to name them. Troy and Jace stepped forward on their own, grinning wide, radiating confidence. Confidence built not on respect for skill, but on the belief that the room belonged to them. Chief Voss gave the protocol warning. No headshots. Controlled contact. One sequence. Both men nodded. Both lied. The crowd tightened. Shoulders lifted, breaths held, posture shifting away from casual into something sharper. The older operators stopped whispering. They could feel the wrongness already. And for a split second before it happened, Mara felt something too, something she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Fear. Not of them. Of herself. Of what she might do if they pushed her beyond the boundaries she had spent years building inside her mind. Because she had been here before. Pinned. Outnumbered. Bleeding. Saving someone who was dying in her arms, while two men tried to finish the job. She hadn't survived that night because she was strong. She survived because she learned exactly where the human body breaks and how little pressure it really takes. She didn't want to go there again. She prayed they wouldn't make her. But the moment she reset her stance, breath steady, feet anchored, they charged. No warning. No training tempo. Full force impact. One kick cracked into her ribs, hard enough to numb her right side. The other hammered into her leg, folding it, throwing her body into the mat with a blunt, sickening thud. The entire ring went dead still. Something about the sound, the violence of it, said this wasn't a mistake. It was assault. Her breath stuttered. Pain radiated like lightning through her side, but she didn't cry out, didn't curl in, didn't ask for help. She laid her palm on the mat, pushed, and came to her feet like someone rising from a grave they were never meant to fit into. Troy smirked. Jace tried to pretend nothing had happened. The crowd didn't move. And Mara, calm, steady, painfully honest, spoke the words that changed everything. You've crossed into live response. 7 words. 7 seconds later, both men would be on the ground screaming with legs that would never be the same. But right now, right here, she stood in the center of a circle of men who doubted her since sunrise, letting them see the version of herself she had tried so hard to keep buried. No anger. No fear. Just inevitability. Because they hadn't knocked her down. They had opened a door she had sworn she'd never walk through again. And now she didn't have another choice. Why didn't they see the shift in her eyes? That was the question echoing in the breathless silence after she stood again, after the dust of the impact settled, after her ribs stopped vibrating from the double hit she hadn't braced for. Every operator in the ring had watched her rise, but only a handful understood what they were really seeing. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even anger. It was surrender, just not the kind her attackers expected. She wasn't surrendering to fear or humiliation. She was surrendering to training, to instinct, to the version of herself she only allowed to surface when everything else had failed. But they didn't know that. Not Troy. Not Jace. They only saw her walk back into stance, feet planted, spine straightened, one hand loose, the other ready, like nothing hurt, like nothing mattered. But something did matter. She had hoped, prayed, begged the universe silently that morning to let her spend one day as just a medic, just a teacher, just a woman doing her job, not a weapon someone might force her to use. And yet here she was, drifting back into a posture she hadn't lived in years. The posture you take right before someone dies. The ring felt smaller now, the air tighter, the eyes surrounding her sharper. People weren't watching out of curiosity anymore. They were watching out of fear, fear that something irreversible was about to happen, and none of them were close enough or fast enough to stop it. Troy didn't feel that fear. Jace didn't feel it either. But they should have. Because the moment they kicked her, the moment they made it real, they stepped into a place she lived in far longer than either of them ever had. She didn't breathe deeply. Deep breaths hurt. She breathed short, steady, measured pulses. Enough air to fuel her body, not enough to let the pain take over. Her shoulders rolled back once. Her fingers flexed once. Her eyes lifted once. And Troy felt something he hadn't felt since his first deployment, a tiny flicker of doubt in the base of his spine. "Still standing, huh?" he taunted, voice louder now, trying to reclaim the room. "Let's see how long that lasts." But the bravado landed wrong, like a joke told at a funeral. Jace shifted behind him, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, but the rhythm was off. The confidence he wore so casually earlier now looked more like a mask slipping at the edges. They were expecting the medic. They were getting the survivor. The memory that rose inside her wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent, not at first. It was quiet. A desert night. A downed convoy. The face of a Marine she'd been treating, his blood on her hands, the sound of distant engines approaching, the smell of burning metal in the air. And then, the ambush. The two men who appeared like shadows, grabbing her shoulders, knocking her backward into the dirt while she shielded the Marine's body with her own. She remembered the heel of a boot pressing her down, the grit scraping her cheek, the realization that she couldn't let them pull her away or he would die there in the sand. She remembered one thought. "I've had enough taken from me." And then the calm. The same calm settling in her bones right now. The calm that comes when you stop being afraid of breaking someone. She blinked once, letting the memory fall away. She wasn't in the desert. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't fighting for two lives. She was here on this mat, with 282 Navy SEALs watching two men who should have known better try to undo her. They didn't know about that night. They didn't know about the scars. They didn't know how long she'd trained herself not to react to intimidation, to pain, to physical threat. They didn't know what lived behind her composure. They were about to learn. Troy lunged. Not the sloppy lunge of someone trying to prove a point. This one was tighter, faster, controlled. His arm shot out, aiming to pin her shoulder, to drive her back into the mat before she had time to reset. He wasn't playing anymore. Neither was she. She stepped aside before his hand even reached her frame, her heel pivoting cleanly as she shifted. One precise twist, one calculated angle, just enough to guide his momentum past her. And then the sound. That dry, sickening crack. That cut through the room like a rifle shot. Troy's leg buckled. His howl tore through the training bay. But Mara didn't flinch, didn't look at him. The part of her that once would have apologized, hesitated, or checked on him hadn't surfaced yet. She was still in the place behind thought, the place where instinct and memory merge and everything becomes motion. Jace gasped, one sharp, terrified sound, and his mask shattered completely. He rushed her anyway. His hand grabbed for her shoulder, desperate, sloppy, panicked. The move lacked everything he'd strutted with minutes earlier. He wasn't attacking now. He was reacting, too late, too outmatched. She dipped beneath his reach. Her heel pivoted behind him. One hand caught his wrist, the other guided his elbow, and then another snap. Lower. Deeper. The wet rupture of bone giving out. Jace screamed so sharply, a younger trainee in the back recoiled and covered his mouth. Two men down. Two injuries that weren't accidents. And a medic still standing, breathing, resetting her stance with clinical calm. For a moment, an impossibly long moment, the world held still. Then the crowd inhaled as one. Not because of what she'd done, but because of what she did next. She crouched beside them. Not to finish anything, not to threaten. To check their breathing. Her hands moved with the same muscle memory she used in field hospitals under red lights in cramped armored vehicles. She checked pulses, stabilized limbs, assessed shock. She didn't speak. She didn't shout. She didn't look around for validation. She did her job. The job they tried to stop her from doing. Chief Voss hadn't moved yet. His hand hovered in the air like he still wasn't sure if he was about to issue an order or take a step forward or rewind time entirely. The operators closest to the ring couldn't move either. They stood with the kind of stunned reverence usually reserved for battlefield ghosts, those rare, impossible moments when someone shows a truth bigger than skill. The truth that some people wear calm the way others wear armor. And that when calm breaks, it doesn't shatter. It cuts. Myra stood again, breath steady, eyes lowered, gloves still on. "Call medical," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't tired. It wasn't regretful. It was factual, like she was reading a weather report. "Jace is losing circulation in that foot." And that was when the room finally moved. Not toward her. Toward the truth. Toward the realization they had all failed to see until it was too late. She didn't prove herself by fighting. She proved herself by getting back up. Why did no one look away when the medics finally knelt beside the broken men? Because they weren't watching Troy. They weren't watching Jace. They were watching her, the woman standing at parade rest, gloves tucked back into her belt, breathing like the violence never touched her. As if she didn't need time to recover. As if she didn't need approval. As if she wasn't replaying the moment in her mind already, searching for the line she didn't want to cross but had been forced past. A line she had spent years burying. The medics snapped open splints, plastic cracked, Velcro tore, painful groans filled the air. Normally, operators turned away at moments like this, out of respect, out of discomfort, out of a silent code that said injuries deserved privacy. But no one moved. Every man there held his breath, anchored by a truth they didn't want to admit but couldn't deny. They had watched arrogance try to crush a medic. They had watched ego try to humiliate her. And they had watched a woman they underestimated turn into something they hadn't prepared for. Not a fighter. Not a victim. Something else entirely. Someone who refused to be broken again. The medical team lifted Troy onto a stretcher. His face was pale, sweaty, jaw clenched so tightly it trembled. Jace was worse. His scream had dissolved into panicked gasps, his fingers shaking violently as they clawed at his ruined leg. He wasn't thinking about the fight anymore. He wasn't thinking about the jokes he'd made. He wasn't thinking at all. Only the pain existed now. The medics did what they were trained to do, stabilize, assess, transport. But even they kept glancing back at Mara, their expressions a strange mixture of respect and bewilderment. Because she wasn't shaking. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even breathing hard. She was still. Too still. Still in the way someone becomes after surviving something that rewires their understanding of danger. Chief Alden Voss finally stepped toward her, but he stopped short, as if afraid to break whatever invisible barrier existed around her. "Kessler," he said quietly, but she didn't look at him immediately. Her eyes were on the medics carrying Jace away. Her face unreadable. Her breath steady, but her fingers trembling just once, so quickly she hoped no one noticed. Someone did. One of the older operators, Elias Draven, caught the micro-tremor. His eyes tightened, not in judgment, in recognition. He'd seen that tremor before. In battlefields. In evac tents. In people who'd done what needed doing, even when that meant stepping into a place inside themselves they tried desperately to avoid. Myra finally turned to Voss. "Yes, Chief." Her voice held no cracks, no anger, no pride. It was perfectly level. "Too level. Stand down," he said. "Medical team will handle it." She gave a single nod and stepped back. But inside her chest, something shifted. Not pain. Not adrenaline. Guilt. Not that she'd defended herself. Not that she'd broken them. But that she hadn't been able to stop herself once the memories hit. She had promised herself she'd never use those techniques again unless she absolutely had to. And today she had. She knew it. She accepted it. But she hated the part of her that hadn't hesitated. One half-beat more and she might have done worse. The ring dissolved slowly. Operators began to step back, not toward the exit but toward her. Not close, nobody wanted to crowd her, but near enough for a silent acknowledgement. Respect didn't sound like applause. It sounded like silence with weight behind it. A few men bowed their heads slightly. Some crossed their arms, studying her like a puzzle they'd ignored for too long. Others avoided meeting her eyes at all, suddenly ashamed they'd laughed earlier. But one thing was universal. No one smirked now. No one dismissed her size. No one made a joke. No one doubted her presence. Two men had walked into the circle thinking they would embarrass her. They walked out carried on stretchers, alive only because she let them be. The command response was immediate. Orders clipped sharply through radios. Security personnel jogged into position. A legal officer was already heading toward the operations wing before the medics even cleared the bay doors. Protocol wasn't optional when an instructor broke two men in a controlled environment, even if the fault wasn't hers. Mara felt the presence at her back before she heard the voice. Petty Officer Kessler, a calm tone said, "You'll come with me." She turned. A uniformed representative from base security stood there, hands behind his back, posture straight but not aggressive. Not an arrest. Not a reprimand. Just procedure. She nodded once and followed. As she walked through the training compound, every pair of eyes followed her. Boots stilled. Conversations died. Even the gulls over the shoreline seemed quieter. And as she passed groups of operators, men who doubted her, mocked her, dismissed her, she felt the shift in the air. Not fear. Not awe. Respect. The kind earned the hard way. But Mara didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. Tired in a way that reached bone deep, quiet and familiar. The kind of tired you get from carrying a burden no one else sees. When she reached the debrief wing, she paused at the door, inhaled slowly and anchored her breath. On the other side waited legal officers, investigative personnel, the leadership board, people who would ask questions she had already begun asking herself. Not was I justified? She knew that answer. The harder question. How much of what happened was them, and how much was me? She didn't want to know the answer. She feared she already did. The door opened. The investigation began. And for the first time that morning, Mara Kessler felt something like doubt. Not about her skills. Not about her actions. About the part of herself that had surfaced today. The part she kept locked away. The part that scared her. The part that had saved her once and nearly consumed her again. Hours later, when the initial debrief ended, Mara stepped out of the room with her jaw tight and her shoulders low. She had repeated every detail with clinical clarity. She had watched the board nod slowly, piecing together timelines. She had seen glimpses of the footage that confirmed what everyone already knew. She wasn't the aggressor. But the truth didn't give her peace. Peace had left her the moment two boots slammed into her ribs. Now she carried something else entirely. The echo of a memory. The taste of a fear she never admitted aloud. and the lingering knowledge that, for the first time in years, she had stopped holding back. And she wasn't sure how she felt about that. How do you defend yourself against something that comes from inside you? That was the question Mara carried with her long after the investigation room door closed behind her. It followed her down the hallway, silent and invisible, the same way old injuries followed her into cold weather and sleepless nights. The board didn't accuse her. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't question her competence. If anything, they treated her with a careful respect she hadn't felt since the last time she'd sat in front of a command table after a deployment incident, one that had left her kneeling in sand, hands soaked with blood that wasn't hers. She hated the memory, hated how easily it surfaced, hated how similar today felt. The legal officer had spoken the truth plainly. You responded to a real threat with appropriate force. But appropriate force didn't stop the old fear. It didn't silence the voice whispering inside her. You didn't even hesitate. And she hadn't. That was what scared her most. Outside, the wind off Sable's shore cut cold through the concrete corridors. It smelled like salt and rusted metal, old scents that reminded her of nights patching up wounded Marines in makeshift aid stations, nights where silence was a luxury and hesitation meant death. She walked slowly toward the barracks, each step measured, each thought heavier than the last. The base had returned to its rhythm, but something was different now. Something subtle, something in the way men shifted when she approached. Eyes followed her. Not with judgment, not anymore. But with caution, with study, with a respect that felt almost like fear. A younger operator paused mid-conversation as she passed him near the armory. He offered a small nod, too stiff to feel natural, too respectful to be casual. She returned the nod, not because she expected it, but because she didn't know how else to respond. Men weren't avoiding her. They were re-evaluating her. And she didn't know yet what she wanted them to see. She reached her room, small, standard issue, unadorned except for a single photo on the desk, a desert horizon, a sky turning gold, a shadow of a figure kneeling beside a wounded Marine. The picture wasn't staged. Someone had taken it in passing years ago. She used to hate it. Now it grounded her. She dropped onto the edge of the cot and exhaled slowly. Her ribs still throbbed where Troy's kick had landed, a deep ache that pulsed every time she inhaled too sharply. She pressed her palm gently against the bruise, wincing. You handled it, she whispered to herself. But that wasn't the truth. She survived it. Handling it was something else entirely. A knock broke the quiet. She straightened, "Come in." The door opened, and Chief Alden Voss stepped inside. He didn't stand tall like a commanding officer right now. He stood like a man who had seen too much and wasn't sure how to carry the weight of what he'd witnessed. "Mara," he said, dropping the formality. She wasn't sure she liked that. "How's the pain?" he asked. "Manageable." He nodded, though the look in his eyes said he didn't believe her. "You did what you were trained to do," he said gently. "Training doesn't make it easier." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't." He walked farther into the room, hands loosely clasped behind his back. "I need you to know something," he continued. "People are talking." She felt her stomach tighten. "About the incident." "About you," he corrected. "About what you did, about how you did it." She remained still. And she asked. "They're not talking with bitterness. They're talking with respect. Real respect, the kind I've only seen a handful of times." She didn't answer. But, he added, "they're also talking with curiosity, and curiosity spreads." Her jaw tightened slightly. She knew what he meant. Some stories on bases grow slowly. Some spread like wildfire. This one wasn't just spreading. It was burning. "The command board will handle the rest," he said. "Your record is clean. The findings are clear. But you need to understand, what happened today won't be forgotten. She swallowed hard. I didn't want it to happen at all. I know, he said, gently, sincerely. The men who matter know it too. Then he hesitated. I'll be assigning you temporary restricted duties for the next 48 hours, not as punishment, as space. Space. The word hit harder than she expected. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to feel everything she'd been holding at arm's length since the moment she hit the mat. Thank you, Chief, she murmured. He nodded once and let himself out. When the door clicked shut, Mara leaned forward, pressing her elbows onto her knees, hands over her face. The silence felt heavier than the noise ever had. The next morning she woke before dawn. She didn't need the alarm. Her internal clock hadn't slept peacefully in years. She stepped out into the cold, early air and walked toward the shoreline trail behind the facility. The sky was still dark blue. The waves were quiet. The gulls hadn't started their morning cries. She liked this hour. No judgment. No eyes. No echoes. Just breath. Just pulse. Just quiet. But even the quiet wasn't enough today. Her mind churned. You warned them. You didn't escalate first. You didn't cross the line, they did. All true. But the thought didn't soothe her. Because another truth lingered behind it. You didn't hesitate. Footsteps approached behind her, slow and deliberate. She didn't startle. She recognized the rhythm a dozen paces ago. Elias Draven, the older operator who'd watched her closely yesterday, stopped beside her. He didn't speak for a long moment. They just watched the horizon lighten. Finally he said, "You're not sleeping. Neither are you. You had a harder day." She didn't argue. Another quiet stretch passed. You didn't break them because you wanted to, he said softly. You broke them because they forced your hand. She exhaled through her nose. I know. Do you believe it? That question, not said with accusation or doubt, but with gentleness, hit her hard. She didn't answer. He nodded, accepting the silence as an answer in itself. You're carrying something that isn't yours, he added. You've carried it for too long. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze. His eyes weren't judging or probing. They were familiar. He'd carried things too. Things that didn't belong to him. Things he couldn't put down, even when the mission ended. You're not a weapon, he said. You're a medic. Medics save lives. But sometimes, saving yourself means breaking someone else. I know what I am, she murmured. He shook his head. No, he said, you know what you had to become. Then he stepped back, gave her a brief nod and walked away, leaving her with a truth she didn't want but needed. When she returned to the base interior, whispers followed her down the hall. Not cruel whispers, not mocking ones, but whispers all the same. Troy and Jace's injuries were circulating. So were the video stills. So were the witness reports. Everywhere she went, men paused, not in fear of her but in the weight of what she represented. Accountability, strength, precision, control, and survival. But she didn't feel strong. She didn't feel in control. Inside, she felt like a fault line, holding steady on the surface, trembling deep underneath. And she had no idea how much more pressure she could take before something cracked. Not her bones, her conscience, her past, her silence. Something was coming. She could feel it, not in fear but in inevitability. A shift, a consequence, a revelation. And she wasn't sure which part of her would meet it, the medic or the survivor. Why did the truth always arrive quietly, never with warning? That question circled Mara's mind 2 days after the incident. During the hours she spent alone, During the moments she tried to breathe past the ache in her ribs, during the silence that filled every corner of the base like fog no one could disperse. Her restricted duty kept her off the training mats and out of the line of fire, but it didn't keep her out of the spotlight. People watched her differently now, some with admiration, some with shock, some with something she couldn't quite read, like curiosity edged with unease. But curiosity was dangerous. Curiosity led to digging, and digging led to the parts of her record that weren't supposed to exist. That's what she feared, not the fight, not the investigation, but the possibility that this incident might pull her past into the light. And her past didn't belong there. By the third morning, the base mess hall grew silent when she walked through the doors. Not awkwardly, not dramatically. It was a respectful silence, the kind soldiers reserved for someone who had proven something significant, something they couldn't name but felt in their bones. She wasn't sure she liked it. She grabbed a tray, picked at the half-warm eggs, and sat at a corner table away from everyone else. She didn't crave solitude. It just followed her naturally, like a shadow with weight. Operators drifted in and out. Conversations started, paused when they saw her, then continued in lower tones. She wasn't excluded. She wasn't included either. She existed in a strange space between the two. The space where people aren't sure what to make of you. Halfway through her coffee, a quiet voice broke the background noise. "Is this seat taken?" She looked up. A man in desert camas stood across from her, lean, early 40s, a face carved by deployment years, silver in the beard, steady eyes. "Elias Draven." She gestured to the chair. "Go ahead." He sat slowly, not like someone nervous, but like someone giving her time to adjust to his presence. "You doing any better?" he asked. "Define better." His mouth twitched just slightly, sleeping, breathing, thinking straight. "1 out of 3. "Which one?" "I'll let you guess." He nodded, already knowing the truth. Silence settled between them, not hard, not awkward. Quiet in the way people talk when they don't need filler words. "I've been on bases for 23 years, Elias said. "I've seen men lose fights they should have won. I've seen men win fights they should have walked away from. But I've only seen 1 or 2 people do what you did." She didn't respond. "And I've never seen someone do it without anger." Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "I wasn't angry." That's the part that scares people. She glanced up, eyes narrowing a fraction. "You included." "No," he said honestly. "What scares me is how much you're carrying behind your silence." She exhaled through her nose. "Elias, I'm fine." "No," he repeated softly. "You're functional. Functional isn't fine." She didn't answer. "You don't have to tell me what happened," he said. "But I know this. People don't move the way you did unless they've been pushed there before." Something inside her chest tightened. He wasn't wrong. She set her mug down. "I don't want to talk about it." "I didn't ask you to." Their eyes met again. Not a challenge, not an invitation, just two people standing on opposite sides of an unspoken understanding. Then he stood. "If you need anything," he said quietly, "I'm around." He left his coffee untouched and walked away. Myra watched his back until the doors closed behind him. She didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid. The administrative call came down by noon. "Report to the command suite at 1300. Her heart tightened when she saw the message. You don't get summoned to the command suite unless something big is coming. Something closed door, something career-shaping or career-ending. She walked there slowly, adjusting her breathing the way she used to before treating severely wounded Marines. Inhale, hold, exhale. Quiet, controlled. The corridor to the suite was empty, too empty. She could hear the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the soft rasp of her boots against the floor, the thump of her own heartbeat tucked under her sternum. When she reached the door, she paused, not because she feared the consequences. Consequences she could handle. What she feared was what they might uncover about the night she tried so hard to forget. She knocked once. "Enter," a voice replied. She stepped inside. 3 people sat at the table. Master Chief Rowan Pike, the highest-ranking enlisted man on the base. Commander Reva Hale, the officer overseeing tactical development. And a civilian, middle-aged, crisp suit, government badge clipped to his lapel. That last one made her stomach twist. Civilians didn't sit in on internal investigations unless there was outside interest. Petty Officer Kessler, Pike said, "Have a seat." She sat. Commander Hale laced her fingers. "We're not here to reprimand you." That was the first warning sign. People only clarified that when what came next wasn't simple. The civilian leaned forward slightly. "We're here because your name came across a desk it wasn't expected to cross, a higher desk, and someone asked us a question." Mara's pulse thudded once heavy. "What question?" Pike exchanged a glance with Hale. The civilian answered. "Why is a petty officer with your skill set teaching medics, and not on a special assignment roster?" Her chest tightened, not with fear, with realization. This was the consequence she hadn't expected. Hale continued, her voice calm but weighted. "There's interest beyond this base. Quiet interest. Someone reviewed your response during the incident. Someone noticed techniques we don't commonly see outside specialized units." She swallowed. "I didn't violate protocol." "No," Hale agreed. "You acted within the rules, that's the point." The civilian folded his hands. "We're asking if you're willing to be reassigned." Mara felt something heavy settle in her ribs, not pain, something deeper. "To what assignment?" she asked. The civilian answered carefully. "That depends on how honest you're willing to be. About where you learned those techniques." A long silence stretched. The room waited. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. Then Pike said something she didn't expect. "We know there are parts of your file that were sealed. We know something happened during your recon deployment. We don't need to know the details. But the right people, they're starting to ask." Her throat tightened. Because this was the moment she'd feared since she stepped onto the base. The moment when the part of her past she'd buried, the part codenamed into classified walls, began clawing its way back to the surface. "Petty Officer Kessler," the civilian said quietly, "we need to know if the woman who broke 2 men in 7 seconds, did it because of instinct? Or because of training someone forgot to mention?" Her fingers curled against her thigh. She didn't break them because she wanted to. She didn't break them because she lost control. She broke them because she remembered something she was supposed to forget. Something she had sworn never to show again. She inhaled once, exhaled once, and said nothing, because she still didn't know which truth would cost her more. What she'd done, or who she really was. The meeting ended without an answer. But the silence that followed her out the door felt heavier than any verdict. Something was shifting. Something was unraveling. Something was coming for the part of her life she'd fled from. And for the first time since the incident, Mara Kessler felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Forewarning. The kind that whispers, "The past isn't done with you yet." Why did the truth feel heavier when it was silent? That was the question that locked itself into Mara's breath the moment she stepped out of the command suite. The door closed behind her with a soft, final thud, quieter than she expected, but somehow louder than any reprimand could have been. They wanted answers. They wanted details. They wanted a history she had spent years burying. But more than anything, they wanted a classification. Was she dangerous? Or trained? And the truth, The part she was afraid to say aloud was both. The hallway outside the suite felt colder than before. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her boots echoed with each step, sharp and hollow. Every sound reminded her of rooms she used to walk through on bases overseas, rooms where decisions weren't suggestions, where silence meant obedience, and where obedience sometimes meant erasing pieces of herself she wasn't ready to lose. This felt too similar, too familiar, too close. She didn't go back to her barracks right away. She drifted through the back corridors, moving without purpose, letting the quiet guide her. Her ribs still ached from Troy's kick. Every inhale reminded her that her body remembered pain even when the mind refused to acknowledge it. She didn't stop walking until she found herself at the old training bay, empty now, the mats still faintly marked from the day everything had gone wrong or right. She wasn't sure anymore. The overhead skylight spilled a pale blue light across the floor. Dust drifted lazily in the air. The space was still, suspended, untouched, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something she hadn't yet said or accepted. She stepped onto the mat. Slowly, deliberately. Her foot sank into the vinyl, and the memory hit her with a force she tried not to show. The impact, the kick, the fall, the silence, her rise. The moment she stopped being a medic and became something else. Something she wasn't ready to name. She closed her eyes, only for a moment, and let the memory wash over her like a wave she couldn't outrun. Her own voice whispered back at her from that day. You've crossed into live response. It hadn't been a threat. It had been a confession. You're here early. Myra opened her eyes. Elias Draven stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. Not intrusive, not judging, just present. She didn't turn fully toward him, couldn't sleep. Thought so. He stepped onto the mat, boots soft against the vinyl, stopping at a respectful distance. He glanced around the empty bay, its quiet ghost still echoing between the walls. This place feels different now, he said. It shouldn't. But it does. She exhaled sharply through her nose. I didn't want any of this attention. I know. I didn't want to hurt them. I know that too. She finally turned to him. Then, why does everyone look at me like I'm 2 seconds away from breaking someone else? Because, he said gently, they don't understand what they saw. Do you? He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. I've seen it before, in places you don't talk about in after-action reports, in the way someone moves when they've been pushed past fear and straight into instinct. You didn't fight them. You didn't attack. You survived. Survival shouldn't look like violence. Sometimes it does. She knew he wasn't wrong. She hated that he wasn't wrong. Elias stepped closer, not invading her space, but reducing the distance between truth and comfort. Let me ask you something, he said quietly. Why are you so afraid of what you did? I'm not afraid of them. I didn't say you were. He waited. She didn't want to answer. So he gave her the answer himself. You're afraid, he said softly, that what came out of you that day wasn't gone, that you didn't bury it deep enough, that maybe it's still there, waiting. Her breath caught. Because he was right. She wasn't afraid of punishment. She wasn't afraid of consequences. She wasn't afraid of the board, or the whispers, or the attention. She was afraid of herself. Of the part of her that stepped forward when she rose from the mat. Of the part she trained years ago under conditions she didn't choose. Of the part she swore she'd never use outside combat. I don't want to be that person again, she whispered. Elias nodded, then don't be. It's not that simple. Yes, he said gently, it is. Violence isn't who you are, it's what you do when someone leaves you no choice. She looked away. You didn't see what I felt. I didn't have to. I saw what you did. You warned them. You controlled the damage. You stabilized them afterward. You didn't lose yourself. If you had, he paused, voice lowering, we'd be talking about funerals right now. A chill crawled down her spine, because she knew he was right. She had held back, even in the heat of it, even with fear and instinct coiled inside her. She had chosen restraint, not because she was weak, because she was strong enough to stop. Her throat tightened. I don't know what they'll decide, she admitted. Command. Higher than command. He nodded, understanding without question. Whatever comes next, he said, don't let their curiosity rewrite your story. You're not the incident. You're the reason it ended before someone died. She finally met his eyes again, and this time she didn't look away. Something in her chest softened, just slightly. A knot she'd been carrying for years eased, not undone, but loosened enough to breathe around. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, not grandly, not dramatically, just enough to show he heard her. The next afternoon, the verdict arrived. Quietly, privately, without ceremony. A single envelope slid under her door. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The paper felt heavy despite its thinness. Her fingers hovered over the seal before she tore it open. Inside one sheet. No reprimand. No punishment. No hidden warnings. Just 4 lines. Action justified. Force appropriate. No violation detected. Assignment options pending at your discretion. Her breath left her in a slow, quiet exhale. Not relief. Not victory. Just stillness. A stillness she hadn't felt since long before Troy and Jace stepped into that circle. She folded the paper, slipped it into her pocket, and stepped outside. The evening air was cool, brushed with the faint smell of seawater and sun-baked concrete. She found herself walking toward the shoreline, toward the quiet trail she had found Elia's on days earlier. When she reached the overlook, she stood there alone, watching waves crash softly against the distant rocks. For the first time in days, she let herself breathe freely. The truth was simple. She had survived something meant to break her. And she had walked through the aftermath without letting it consume her. She wasn't the medic they doubted. She wasn't the weapon they feared. She wasn't the ghost of her past mission. She was something steadier, something quieter, something harder to define. Someone who rose. Someone who chose restraint when rage would have been easier. Someone who carried scars without letting them guide her hands. Someone who understood that strength isn't loud, isn't angry, isn't violent. Strength is control. Strength is standing up again. Strength is knowing when to stop. She looked at the waves, at the sky turning gold, at the world that kept moving despite everything. A soft, steady breath left her chest. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes that is enough to change everything.